What's going on, you guys? You're tuned into the Cutting Room Knife Review. I'm your host, Garrett, and today we're taking a look at the Vosteed Kroc. Now, the Vosteed Kroc is Vosteed's newest addition to their lineup, and I think it's one of their more unique releases as of late. They've actually had a couple real unique releases, like the Schillen Cutter, along with, this Vosteed Kroc. There's some interesting shapes that they've came out with, and there's some traditional shapes they came out with. They've done a pretty good job of mixing it up. What's up, guys? I'm Garrett. You're tuned in to the Cutting Room Knife Review, where I review knives, blades, and all things sharp. Please like and subscribe so I can keep bringing you more killer knife content. Now, I was initially really attracted to this Vosteed Kroc. It looked like a knife that I would get on my own, not just to review, something that I would purchase, just the way I'm attracted to a knife. This knife attracted me to it. It's honestly one of the best looking Vosteeds that I think has been released, especially the non-traditional Vosteeds. And when I got it, I have mixed opinions about this knife, to tell you the truth. I think Vosteed's done some things really well with this knife, and there's some things that I would change about this knife if I were to go back and do a version 2 of it. But all in all, I think they've done a good job on this knife. Obviously, it's sold well for them already. And for what it's worth, I think it lives up to the hype that was around it when it first came out. Now, the one thing I'll say about this knife is that I did not expect the size to be what the size was. I thought this knife was going to be bigger than it was when it showed up. I was very surprised by how actually small this knife is. For some reason, I had in my mind that this knife would probably be about an inch bigger than it was. Maybe it was just the marketing campaign they did. Maybe it's just the shape of the knife, or maybe just my assumptions. And as it turns out, my assumptions with Vosteed is that I normally expect their knives to be bigger than they are. So let's take a look at this knife, its size, its specifications, and its comparisons to some other knives. So the overall length of the Vosteed Kroc is 7 inches exactly. It's 7 on the dot. And the blade length is 2.99 inches. Which I think is funny. If I was trying to keep a blade under 3 inches, I'd probably make it 2.95 or something that couldn't be mismeasured if we are actually trying to keep a knife under that 3-inch mark for whatever legal regulations that a county or a jurisdiction might have. Where I live, we can carry whatever size blades we want, but I know that that's not everywhere. So I appreciate Vosteed for keeping the blade smaller than 3 inches, but doing 1/100th of an inch smaller than 3 inches is going to be awfully hard to measure. Though it's all good. So the blade width is 1.18 inches, which is actually really wide. It's a big, thick blade, and I like that. I like big bellied blades. Big belly clip points are kind of my thing, or modified clip points are my thing. This is kind of a modified sheep's foot, and that's up my alley too. So when I initially saw this knife, I liked it. I like big, wide, chunky knives like this. Now, the thickness is 0.118, so it's actually relatively thin. And that's nice because for how long it is and where the actual grind goes up to, it's going to keep the knife real thin and actually be pretty good and pretty slicey. And that's what you want out of a sheep's foot blade. This is a knife that's made to slice things. It has one edge, a little bit of belly to it, but you're not going to be poking too much stuff with this. You're not going to be laying this into different materials at different edges like you might on a tanto or any knife that has multiple cutting edges to it. This is very simple. One edge, we're going to be pulling through materials and slicing them, which is fine. That's what a knife is meant to do for the most part, and this knife actually does it fairly well. So the blade material on this knife is S35VN, which is a big step up from most of the Vosteeds that I have shown on the channel so far. Most of the Vosteeds that I've shown on this channel so far have been budget steels, being 14C28N. We have seen a 154CM with a Martin, and now we're taking another step up from 154CM to the S35VN steel. And this is the first of the super steels. And S35VN is intended to be a step up from S30V, and the S30V being like the original super steel. And I believe that Chris Reeve is the person responsible for making S35VN as a jump up from that. I believe it is a little more durable and a little bit easier to put an edge on. You can put a really nice edge on S35VN. At the same time, it's for some reason not that popular. It's kind of gets not a bad rap, but it's just not as exclusive in the elite knife circles. So S35VN is a replacement for S30V, and it's a tougher steel. It's also a steel that takes an edge easier. It's easier to sharpen. Now, its edge retention might be a little less than S30V, but in real world application, that's probably negligible. And because it's so much easier to sharpen, you can put the edge right back on it. S35VN, for whatever reason, is not respected. I don't feel as much. And people like let's take for instance Spyderco. Spyderco uses S30V as their baseline steel, and nobody cares about that. Everybody loves their S30V Spyderco. Nobody really brags about it, but nobody really shits on it either. Whereas S35VN is kind of one of those steels that is considered like almost a budget super steel. People prefer to put other steels on it than S35VN. Now, there are better steels out there, of course. S45VN is a replacement for it. If we're going to put MagnaCut or, really Van X into this conversation, of course, those are better steels. But for the price that S35VN comes in at, and the knives that can have S35VN on them, and the price point they're at, it's really an amazing steel. S35VN is really easy to machine, grind, and polish. And because of that, it's easier to work on. People are able to, not charge as much for it. That's part of the reason that they don't charge as much for it, is because it's easy to work on. It's easy to machine. So S35VN, in all practicality, is tougher and easier to put an edge on than S30V. And you find it on these kind of in-between price point pocket knives. This knife is about $130. And it's hard to find knives in that price range with better steel than S35VN. Honestly, a lot of times in that price range, you're still getting 154CM, which is a much inferior steel to S35VN. I would argue that 154CM is a lot of times overpriced on knives because it's more popular than 14C28N. But when you really look at the comparison between those two steels, I think 154CM has a better looking grain structure and kind of looks prettier than 14C28N. But 14C28N is almost like a better workhorse of a steel. Now, we get into powder metallurgy steels, and when we get into that, that's kind of why we might have differences of opinion between 14C28N and 154CM, and then steels like S35VN, which is of course a powder metallurgy steel. Just the powder metallurgy steels being nicer steels, a better process to make the steels. Than the older steels like 14C28N, which is not a powder metallurgy steel. That being said, I think that you get a lot of bang for your buck out of the knife steel at this price point. I think that for it just being, $30 above my budget banger range of under $100, you're getting a huge upgrade in steel quality and just cutting ability, edge retention, and toughness to the steel. And really, it's a great deal. It really is a good deal on this knife, and it's that kind of in between price point and in between steel that I really think you're getting a great value in S35VN on this knife. So we have it in a black stonewash finish, which looks really nice. And the black stonewash finish, because it's stonewashed, it makes it a real nice matte black finish. But on our edges, we can kind of almost see through the finish, where you get kind of like these lines on it that look like it's been worn in. That's just because of the stonewash, and then this blade is basically brand new, but you're able to see basically the lines on the knife. And that's just how black wash goes. I'm a big fan of it. It's nice. I like that you can basically touch all over this blade. And unlike some DLCs or PVDs, you don't get fingerprints on it so bad. And it tends to be a very usable finish, where just like stonewash, the black wash doesn't show marring. You can really use the heck out of this blade, and it doesn't look all marked up like you can eventually have with PVD. And if you have a good DLC finish, of course, which costs much more than a black wash finish, you should be able to wipe it away every time. But even still, you can still wear into a DLC finish. Whereas I think that if you do wear into a black wash finish, it kind of blends in just a bit better. The HRC on this knife is 60 to 61, 60 plus or minus 1. And really, the HRC that we're looking for optimally on S35VN is 59 to 61. So this is heat treated perfectly. Vosteed did a great job. You're getting all the bang for your buck out of the steel that you want. And that's going to be the best balance of toughness, edge retention, and then ease of sharpening that you're going to get out of the steel. So it's about perfect. Our handle length on the steel, moving on away from the blade to the handle, is going to be 4.02 inches. So we essentially have a 4-inch handle, 3-inch blade, 3 to 4 ratio, which is a really good ratio as far as handle to blade length goes. Personally, I would like a little more handle on this knife. I have a big hand. It fits in my hand about perfect. Like, I'm just right at the edge, and I wish there was just a little bit more down here. When I choke up on the knife, it's just great. This knife kind of lends itself to me choking up on it. I feel like this is more natural the way I hold it than to hold it back like here. Now, if you have a smaller hand, that's probably not the case. And not everybody has such big mitts as I do, so I have to take that into consideration. The handle width is 1.13 inches, so it's actually smaller than the blade, which is interesting. You don't see that a whole ton. The blade is wider than the handle is, but it fits down into the knife. This is very aesthetic. I think it looks great, and it's very close. We're talking about tenths of an inch here. You're not going to notice it too much. So the handle thickness is 0.51, so we have half an inch, which is very comfortable. I like it. Those dimensions are just fine. And so what we have for the handle materials is we have aluminum here. We have a carbon fiber inlay, which I think looks great. We have an aluminum backspacer, and then we have a steel pocket clip. So we have stainless steel hardware, and the knife is pretty nice. We're able to flip-flop the clip from either side. It's reversible. I don't really seem to mind this hole being open on the carbon fiber. I think the carbon fiber hides this hole very well, although I would say that if I was a knife maker, I would always use a tab for the opposite side. It's going to cost a little bit more money, but gosh, man, it just looks cheesy to have open holes on the non-clip side. In my opinion, I just think it looks like an unfinished knife, and I really don't like it. This knife is very lucky. This carbon fiber hides it very well, and this doesn't seem to bother me as much. We have ourselves a little lanyard hole right here, which is fine and dandy. Goes through the backspacer, and I don't really lanyard up many of my knives. My Chris Reeves end up with lanyards. Some of my Spydercos end up with lanyards, but for the most part, I'm not really a lanyard guy. I am a backspacer guy. So that being said, that's that. We have, of course, the top liner lock on this Vosteed, and that is by far my favorite of the locking mechanisms that Vosteed has out. Their Vanker lock is very interesting, and I had just gotten the shelling cutter that has a Vanker lock as my first experience with it. I haven't really gotten into it enough to make a big comment on it yet, but I do know top liner locks are amazing, as my experience with Spyderco runs very deep, and it's essentially the same mechanism as their compression lock, just activated with this button. And this knife is no exception. It has the oval shaped button for their top liner lock. I like that. It's much like the Martin. In that case, it's very easy for me to press. I don't find that the scales bother me pressing it. I definitely like how it sits. It's very easy to access, and I have no issue depressing it. And it actually sits in fairly flush. I don't have a hot spot with it at all when I carry the knife. And when I hold the knife, I'm not holding it there. Though left-handed, I don't think it would bother you much. I don't think it sticks out enough to really wind up being a hot spot if you are using this as a left-handed user. So that being said, we have two ways of deploying this knife. We have, of course, the finger holes, which is nice for reverse flicking. It's big enough to do a thumb roll with it, or we can thumb flick it if you're better than me at it. I don't normally thumb flick this knife. I reverse flick it most of the time. And we have the front flipper, which on this knife works very well. I think they did a good job of the geometry of this knife and the aesthetics of it, making this front flipper look good. Sometimes I think they look gaudy on knives, and I'm not really a fan of them. But this one is great. So I like the front flipper on this knife. It's very effective. I don't miss the flip very often with it at all. It works very well as far as the geometry for the front flipper goes. So that being said, this knife is put together very well. I like how this knife looks. I really like the aesthetics of this knife. It is on the smaller side. So let's compare it to some other knives that are popular and get a look at how this knife compares to them. So, as by law, we will compare this to the Para 3 first. So the Spyderco Para 3 is actually a little bit bigger than this knife. Believe it or not, the Para 3 is actually bigger than a knife. And I'm only finding that really to be true with a lot of Vosteeds. Most of the time, the Para 3 is smaller than most knives, but in this case, it is bigger. So we will compare it to the PM2, which is, of course, much larger than this knife. The PM2 actually dwarfs it by a considerable amount. Now, I find that the Para 3 is actually a much more usable knife for me than this knife. This knife is almost too small for me. Now, it's 7 inches, which is right in the perfect spot of my EDC carry. And it being a 4-inch handle, I should be able to fit on it. Like, just by the sheer numbers and on paper, this knife should work for me. It feels small. Now, we have the Schillen cutter, which is a very similarly sized knife by Vosteed, and the way the handle works on it and the way that this choil works on it, my hand just melts into it. Now, I don't ever try and hold it back here. I'm always choked up on the Schillen cutter. But that feels like where my hand is supposed to be, and it feels like there's a substantial amount of handle in my palm. Now, this knife, this Kroc, I have to choke up on. I just have to have the amount of handle in my palm. I feel like I want to choke back on it, though. Where I want the cutting edge to be, I kind of want to be back here. For some reason, I want this little space between my hand and the blade. And that's kind of from it having a similar blade shape to the Spyderco Smok, and there's like a space right here on the Smok. And I'll go get the Smok and we will take a look at it real quick. So I'm back. I forgot to bring my Spyderco Smok out. But here it is. So the Spyderco Smok has kind of a similar style sheep foot to it. Now, they're not exactly the same blade shape, but I feel like I want to hold them in my hand the same way. And I hold the Smok here. I hold the Smok with my finger in this groove, or maybe up here, but I never really choke up on the Smok all the way to the blade. I hold it here, and I have this kind of space between my fingers. Maybe this is just something I've gotten used to because I absolutely love the Smok as a knife. This is one of my absolute favorite Spydercos, one of my absolute favorite hard use carries. It's kind of the anti-Spyderco, but being that it has so many things to it that are like antithetical to traditional Spyderco, but I just love this knife. And when you look at the actual cutting edge of these two knives, while this sheep's foot kind of goes down, this is almost like a reverse tanto, more than a sheep's foot. It's very square up here and thick and chunky. When you look at the blade edge, they're almost the same. They really are almost the same. It's this like little slight belly to a 2 3/4-ish, 2 2/3 inch effective edge sheep's foot. And that's exactly what this is. There's a little bit more belly to the Spyderco Smok. The Smok is, of course, a hollow grind, where this is a flat grind. But when you really look at just the edge, you look at the edge of this knife, and they're going to cut the same. They're going to do the same job. And we're looking at $125, $150 more for this knife. Not to mention I threw aftermarket scales on it, but just that aside, they're really going to do a similar job. You look at the edges, and they're very similar with blade geometry, or at least edge geometry. And where I want to hold the knife is similar. And you look how much more meat or length this Smok has on its grip, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for more in my hand and getting this blade a little bit away from my fingers, so I can still get my thumb way out here, and I can really do some good slicing, some really effective slicey work with this knife. This knife, for it to fill my hand, I really want to choke up to here, and now I've got this blade all the way at my knuckle. It's all the way here. I want it out here, but when I get there, I'm dealing with like the same thing I get with the Chris Reeve in Small and Cosi, where my pinky finger is kind of back here, almost pushing up on the knife, and this feels small to me. Now, granted, this is a problem that I have with almost all Vosteeds. They're great designs. They're great knives. They're like half an inch too small for my hand, and I have a big, extra large, big, just gorilla hand. I don't know. I'm a big person. I'm 6 feet tall. I'm over 200 pounds. I'm a big guy. But I feel like a lot of us are not small guys. We don't all have small hands. And these Vosteeds are made for like smaller hands. Now, this is a great compact carry. This is like almost compact to me. This is just a small little knife. It's not a big knife. It's not. It feels small to me, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think somebody with my wife's hand size, I think it's a great size knife for. I think if you were a smaller person and you wore a size medium glove, this would be a great knife for you. You could hold it back here. So that being said, that's kind of where I sit with the size of this knife. My hand doesn't fit that great onto it. I need a little bit more handle. That's it. Vosteed, I need a little bit more handle. Give me a little bit more handle. When I saw this knife when it first came out, the way that the marketing was, it looked like a bigger knife. It looked like an 8-inch knife to me. I thought it was going to be this big, chunky thing. I really thought it was going to be kind of a chonker of a knife. And I was really looking forward to this new Vosteed because the way the blade came off, the blade's, like I said, it's wider than the body is. It just felt like it was going to be a big chunker of a knife, and it's not. It's not. It's a sheep's foot. It's a thick sheep's foot. It's a wide sheep's foot. It is kind of a chunky sheep's foot, but it's not a big knife. In fact, it's kind of a small knife, and I want to hold it back here. I don't want to hold it up here. I want to hold it back here. But that aside, it slices really well. The blade geometry is good. It is much like the Smok. It cuts a lot like the Smok does. If you're a fan of the Smok, this thing's going to cut like it. Hopefully you have a hand smaller than me, or you like really choking up on the knife a whole lot. But I feel like I'm only cutting with like this much of the blade. When I'm choked up this far, I don't get back towards my finger that much when I'm cutting. So it throws my whole hand up. We have jimping right here on the blade, and it kind of throws my thumb above it. I'm way up on the knife, and I don't want to be. But it runs on ceramic ball bearings. It has really smooth action. It's a nice knife. One of the other things that I noticed about this knife, and probably the only other qualm that I have with this knife, is that the lockup is kind of a dud as far as acoustics go. It has no crack to it. I would expect this knife to have this big pop when it cracks, a Rosie style pop. You know, you listen to a Spyderco that has more of a pop to it and doesn't feel like it has as much blade to it. This one doesn't have a pop, but it doesn't have the blade to have a pop. When you listen to like a Rosie, you listen to Kunwu is another good example of a knife that has a really good crack to it. I like that crispness to the crack. This is really a dull sound. It's got a real dull thunk to it, especially when you do the thumb roll. There's almost no acoustic to it. And that's a real nitpicky thing with a knife, especially a $135 knife. If I spend a bunch of money on this, it'd make more of a difference to me how it sounded. But I don't like the acoustics on it. I just think it's very muffled, kind of just a dead sound to it. Is that a big deal? Like, it's not high up on my list of big deals when it comes to knives because it doesn't have anything to do with the usability of this knife. Where the knife sits in my hand is a much bigger deal to me than the sound that it makes. But it's a review, and that's one of the things I do review. And it's one of the things I don't like about the knife. I don't like how it sounds. It has a thunk and like not a crack to it. I wish it had a crack. I think if it had that, I might like the knife even more. But it doesn't. The smoothness of the knife is good. Vosteed's ball bearings are good enough. This one kind of feels a little sluggish to me. I don't know. It's not in a bad way. It's not tight. It's not rough by any means. But it's something that we need to think about. So, unfortunately, upon editing this video, I found that my sixth cut, the resolution or the overview of this knife, had no audio on it. And I've given away my Vosteed Kroc, so I can't reshoot this episode. So you guys get to have an overdub from me. And we'll wrap this up with me talking over my last video. This is a good knife. It really is. You get a lot of bang for your buck with this knife. From the blade steel to the handle materials, the inlay. It's a great knife. It has a deep carry pocket clip. The top liner lock is great. There's like absolutely nothing wrong with this knife other than the two things that I mentioned. It's too small for my hands, and there are, not the greatest acoustics when it opens. But if those are the only two things holding it back, if you have smaller hands, this is a really good deal of a knife. It truly is. Vosteed has really brought it to the table with their knives lately. And this one especially, this is a good design, and it's for a really good price. And they're about to come out with, or they have came out with at this point, another Kroc with a lower end steel. I believe it's 14C28N, and a little bit less expensive of handle materials, and I believe that's in the budget banger category. I think it's dropped under $100. Don't quote me on that, but you're going to have some more options for the Kroc in the future. And so, if you're looking for a slicey, single edge, reverse tanto knife, the nice finish on it in a super steel for a really good price, this is a great choice. And that's about what I have to say on this knife. Is if your hand's small enough to fit this knife, it's a good choice. If you have large hands like me, you might want to look for a different knife because this is, at least for me, a hard fit. I have to be choked up on this knife. So that's the Vosteed Kroc. And I'm Garrett with the Cutting Room Knife Review. And until next time, you guys, stay sharp.